365 Sports here on your Friday, and we're going to do this every week. We're going to go through the conferences and talk to a fellow podcaster who covers that conference and go through kind of the big news of the week. And here in week one, we're starting out with the Big Ten and Kenneth Davis of Big Ten Country. Kenneth, first of all, great to meet you. Thanks for hopping on the show. Excited to get this going. And he does the Big Ten Country podcast, also does a Bears podcast. And so go and look those up. They're both really, really, really good. And then when he gets his other podcast going again, I listened to some back episodes of that. He's a funny dude. You and I are like pop culture and sports guys, Kenneth. I think we're going to have that in common. So we'll probably be dropping some references as we go through this.
All right, Paul. Thank you for having me. I look forward to this, man. Let's get this going.
All right. So this is everybody's calling this the most intriguing college football season ever. This is the one, the 12-team playoff realignment. The Big Ten is now the Big 18. I mean, there's so many things. How do you think the Big Ten will morph and adjust to their new way of life? I think that a lot of the focus has been on how does Oregon and USC and the other teams fit into this thing, but how does the old Big Ten fit into this?
It's funny that you say that, you asked that question, and I think part of the issue is this. If some of the teams from the Pac-12 were as strong as they were last year, I think this would be a lot more interesting, but still the playing style is going to force traditional Big Ten teams to have to improve their scoring. Because, like, for instance, I always say this when it comes to Oregon, because that's really, if you look at the fact that, you don't have the Washington the way that they were with Michael Penix Jr., Rhule and Denze, of course, and just full disclosure, I'm an Alabama fan, and, losing, the head coach to Alabama. And so just like that, but you have Oregon, and it's going to be a race to 40 in some issues. And I think if you don't know about the Big Ten, that's usually not the style of play. All right. Also, I think the question will be what the traditional Big Ten schools will do out on the edges, because that's the way that a lot of these Pac-12 schools are going to try to attack your defenses. The flip side, and as you kind of pointed out, when everyone's always saying, well, what are the Pac-12 schools? One, Oregon has enough money to do whatever they want when we're talking about the trenches. So it's not going to be as hard as perhaps where SC doesn't seem like, it has the same amount of money funneling through it as it did with Pete Carroll as far as NIL deals and, getting all the transfers that you want to get in. I'm taking a wait and see approach with Washington, even though Washington has proven in the past that they can bring in a new head coach and still continue to be a pretty good program. UCLA, there's no reason for us to discuss UCLA, and I'm not trying to take a dig at them, but at this moment, there's really no reason to discuss it. But I think a school like Ohio State, that probably won't be a problem. We've discussed this on Big Ten Country, and I still think they can score with it. I wonder, will Will Howard be more of a game manager, which isn't a knock on him when you have as many weapons that Will Howard will have him at Ohio State. I wonder when you're talking about Sharon Moore and what's left at Michigan, what they will look like. Because even though sometimes we saw they didn't put the ball in J.J. McCarthy's hands, but we also know that he was extremely efficient when it came to third down conversion. So it'll be interesting to see how the old and the new adjust. But I still think that's the cream of the Big Ten. And I guess if we're saying the cream, I would still put Michigan there because I'm going to take a wait and see approach to their national champions, and I don't want to disrespect them. But if we're talking about Ohio State and then on the lower rung, Penn State, I think perhaps, and I love Drew Aller in Penn State, so I'm biased in this situation. I want to see what that offense does. I want to see if they attack the outsides, if they put the ball in his hands and let him go at it. They kind of, I don't want to say held him back last year, but they didn't want him to get in a situation where he cost them in turnovers, so they didn't let the ball fly at times. But they also didn't have the players on the outside that he can execute chunk plays like that. And it seems like they may have a better opportunity this year than they did last year. And that's also another season as Drew Aller as a starter. You would think there would be another step in improvement.
Well, let's talk about Penn State for a second. I think the game of the week for the Big 12 and not only the Big 10, because they've got USC and LSU on Sunday night, but the second game of the week for the Big 10, it is for the Big 12. It's West Virginia Penn State. It's a huge game in Morgantown for West Virginia. I mean, Pat McAfee's essentially shut down the city, doing his show there right now, and I mean, so much is weighing on this for Neil Brown, and he's got a huge chip on his shoulder. I think Garrett Green has a huge chip on his shoulder about trying to prove it. And then Penn State comes in there, a team that beats them most of the time they've played historically, including just a season ago. How big a game is this for Penn State in relation to what's going on in Morgantown right now?
I think it's a big game because it's not a cakewalk. A lot of times when you look at the fact that it's the beginning of the season and you mention it, USC's taking LSU, that's definitely not a cakewalk. But when you're talking about West Virginia, Penn State going into West Virginia and Morgantown, that's hard. And you also have the fact that we have to see what this defense is going to look like with Manny Diaz leaving to go to Duke. We have to know what this offense is going to be, which I just alluded to a second ago. I think for me, it means a lot because James Franklin has to shake off the shadows of the past. Yes, he doesn't have to go through Michigan and Ohio State, but if you want to really be that team in the playoffs, you're going to have to beat teams like that. And on the West Virginia side, as you mentioned or alluded to last year, it wasn't an easy game for Penn State. It wasn't just a simple victory. So it means a lot for them to get their season started in the proper way. I will say, and I'll just go ahead and say it, I do believe, and I said it on Big Ten Country, so it's not like I'm holding it back. I do believe Penn State will win that game. But I'm again, and I'm going to tell you guys that on here, I like Rhule a lot. And in that my glasses are rose colored because I haven't seen him do it. But when you look at the arm talent, when you look at the athleticism, I think that Rhule could be taking another step this year, and the nation could be on alert. I don't want to, again, I'm biased. So it's just, you always had those guys that you kind of like fall in love with and you hope they become what you see their potential. And he's probably number one for me right now. And also, let's not forget the fact that you have a double caller now playing the edge. Forget about the worries about coverage. Now it's, pin your ears back and get after that quarterback. And I know it's simple and it's easy comp, but if he's anything like Micah Parsons, it's going to be a long day, in Morgantown.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he's going to want to come out and start to put even more people on notice as he starts to make a name for himself and try to move up draft boards and to try to become the number one defender, perhaps coming off the board in next year's draft. So I think it's going to be a tough game, but I think Penn State will be able to pull out. And I think Penn State needs to start the season. I don't know if it's going to be a resounding win, but I think that's what they should aim for, to kind of set the tone of what people should expect from the Nittany Lions this upcoming season.
All right, we'll close with LSU and USC because I do want to get your opinions on Lincoln Riley, like trying to back out of this game, before and what that kind of says about maybe where he feels. But Nebraska is, in my opinion, one of the most intriguing teams in the country. We know Matt Rhule real well here because we're in Waco, and he was the coach at Baylor, friend of the show. I should have we got an autograph helmet that we usually leave on set that he sent us from Nebraska. And they're rolling out with a true freshman quarterback who has a lot of moxie. Now, nobody's going to really talk about them this week against UTEP. And this is a good test. Next week they play Colorado, who, as we know last night, they won the game, but they don't look a whole lot different than they did a year ago when it comes to toughness. So in game management, as we build to that next week, what are your thoughts on Nebraska long-term through this season and maybe winning some of those close games that they lost? And Nebraska lost games because of really dumb mistakes. Like they didn't have a great offense, but even in that, their defense was so good that they would find ways to even make like fumbles look worse. Like that was their thing. Like all of a sudden, like a fumble's bad enough, but a fumble, like the way they did it was 10 times worse. The worst fumble you've ever seen. Do you think that gets tightened up? And do you think that they start making headway, not to contend for the league title, but to maybe, put a charge into some of the top teams that they play?
All right, I'll start with the turnover issues that were horrendous that you just alluded to. Look, you know Matt Rhule. I haven't had an experience to meet Matt Rhule. I think we all know that he's a program builder. Nebraska is a sleeping giant that I'll be honest, I never thought anyone would be able to attempt to wake it up. I do believe that Matt Rhule may be waking up that sleeping giant in Nebraska. So I do think that the turnovers won't be as bad as they were last year. Now, when it comes to, and you said it, we don't expect them to be one of the best teams, but we're asking them to get to where Maryland was last year, where we knew that Maryland wasn't up there with Penn State and Michigan and Ohio State, but outside of, because remember how bad Iowa started? Iowa started bad last year, everybody, if you weren't paying attention to Iowa, right? And then, their offense was horrendous. Kirk Ferentz's son was let go. But the defense was crazy. And but the reason I'm bringing it up is because we didn't know where to place Iowa at some part during last year. So I do think Nebraska's going to start approaching that mid-level. And the question, though, to answer your question, it really depends on, and I think it may be asking a lot, who Dylan Raiola is as a freshman. If he's it's asking a lot, but if he's a stud or has stud traits as a freshman, they're going to be better than even what we're expecting right now, because a lot of teams within the Big Ten aren't used to playing a quarterback with that type of arm talent, with that elusive ability, and it has to transfer into college. So we're talking about a high school player, but with a magician in a way. And if he shows traits of that as a freshman, it's going to take Nebraska to a whole nother level in his tenure there. It's going to boost recruiting, because people are going to want to go and play with him. And it won't just have to be on the offensive side. It can be on the defensive side, because the defenders are going to know people are going to be watching them play, because you have this star player. So I think to get to the point that you're asking, it depends on who Dylan Raiola is. Now, when I'm saying that, I don't want to ask too much of a freshman to do something like that, but it really depends on year two more than year one. But if he's a stud, a lot of people haven't seen Nebraska like back in the days, Nebraska. Now I'm old, but I'm not that old. So I'm talking about 90s Nebraska. You know what I'm saying? So, a lot of people haven't seen when they owned college football, and that was just running the option. So it'll be interesting, but I think they have the proper head coach to run the program. I think Nebraska could really be something. I don't know exactly what they'll be this year, because I think you're asking a lot for a young and up and coming player to just come and set the conference ablaze. But it'll be interesting to see what he does and what Matt Rhule does to take that program to the next level, because clearly he's capable of doing it.
What are your thoughts on, you mentioned Iowa, what are your thoughts on what their offense looks like? They still have Phil Parker, who's probably the best pound-for-pound defensive coordinator in maybe the last 20 years. I mean, when you can look at your defense and tell them, like, guys, we're going to get 10 points out of those clowns over there, at best, you guys are going to have to get me at least a touchdown. And they're like, all right, no problem. We got you. Like, that is next level genius coaching and ability that he has. What is their offense going to look like? And I don't expect Kirk Ferentz to all of a sudden say, I've been reading all this stuff about Mike Leach and that's where I'm going to go. But he does have to adopt some of that if he wants to be able to, down the line, however long he's got left at Iowa, play USC, Oregon, Washington, Ohio State. Purdue is trying to get there, with Graham Harrell and what they're doing. And those offenses are coming to the Big Ten. They've already kind of been there, but they're going to come in mass now. How do they adjust to that, knowing that even with Phil Parker, that 10 points a game might have to be like 18 or 19 points a game?
That's the key right there that you just said. They have to try to get to 20 points a game. And I can't sit on here and lie to you and tell you that I believe that's what's going to happen. I hope, because you just pointed out the defense is ridiculous. Like, I still think we take Iowa's defense for granted. It's a given that they're going to have one of the greatest defenses in the country. And if they only had an offense that can score 20 to 25 points, they would be contending. I wouldn't have them as a favorite, because I still believe in this state of college football, you have to at least get up to 30 points, regardless if you have a good defense, because even good defenses have bad days unless Kirby Smart is the head coach. But I don't know. We always know that it's tight end you, and they seem to always kind of have issues with getting guys to execute on the outside and getting big chunk yards. I mean, that's really the question. And Paul, I can't sit here and tell you that it's going to happen. I would be lying to you. I have to actually see the season really start to. I have to see 3 games at least to know if it's trending towards it's a competent offense. Because if they have a competent offense, I mean, they could be in the playoff. Like if they have a confident offense, if Iowa has a confident offense, we will all feel like we neglected talking about them this offseason because clearly they have a great chance to get into the playoffs, even though you just talked about that schedule. That schedule is a juggernaut, basically. So that will probably be a hiccup as far as really getting it done this season. But I have to see it, Paul, man, because I'm of course I host a Big Ten show, so I'm biased on that, but I'm not an idiot. And they haven't been able to show us that they can be competent on the offensive side. And I'm really going to take a wait and see approach to answer your question.
Yeah. All right. LSU, USC. Let's dive into this one for a little bit before we go. And then I'm going to ask you your opinion on a couple of kind of like random things around the country. You did mention Alabama, and I want to get into that too. All right. LSU, USC. Lincoln Riley tried to back out of this game. Like he kind of telling USC, like, do we have to go to Vegas and play LSU? Which makes me wonder how confident he is in this iteration of his team right now, especially bringing in D'Anton Lynn and trying to straighten out the defense, that he maybe doesn't want to start out 0-1, which is, as we know, 0-1's not as big a deal now as it used to be. But it does make me wonder about what they're going to be. Their quarterback, Heisman Trophy winner, is now, you're doing a podcast where you're going to talk about him every day. Like, Caleb Williams is now your main subject on your Bears podcast. And he does not have that anymore. Miller Moss looks like he's very talented. Yes. And he waited his turn, like most guys don't anymore in college football. But it feels like there's a little bit of cautious optimism around USC, but they are trying to be realistic about where they are as they transition into a new conference.
I think I don't like anybody trying to back out of anything.
Yeah.
But I honestly don't think USC should want that LSU smoke at this point. We'll still see what Miller Moss can do, but I'll say this right now, and he can prove me wrong. And again, I do have a Bears podcast. But, I mean, to say that you want him to be what Caleb was, and then you mentioned it defensively with bringing Lynn in. The defense last year was abysmal. It made a lot of it created a lot of the reasons outside of not having Jordan Addison, a lot of the reasons why Caleb had more turnovers than he had his previous seasons. So I have to see it. Lincoln Riley, we all know, is definitely a crafty offensive mind, but you still need the studs to get it done. And now you're entering outside of LSU. And look, I'll tell you, we did our predictions on Big Ten Country. I have LSU winning that game. Outside of LSU, you're entering the Big Ten, and this is where big men play. And you're going to have to be able to stop the run, and you're going to have to be able to run that football. And if you can't do either one of those, it's not going. It will help if Miller Moss is nice, but it's not going to matter as much because you're going to get your face smashed in. And I do think after time, perhaps Lincoln Riley can get them over the hump. But I mean, what happened at USC last year for someone who all last season, unfortunately, had to talk about Caleb Williams perhaps being the Bears quarterback. But what you didn't expect them to kind of fall on their faces like they did in the second season of Lincoln Riley's tenure as the head coach. So I have to see it. I have to see if Jaden Lynn can get the defense to play in the way they need to play. But I also have to see if, you have better receivers that can help Miller Moss get the game down and how competent they are in the run game, because that's going to mean a lot if they're going to have any success this upcoming season.
Absolutely. All right, let's get your just kind of rapid fire thoughts on a couple of things. You mentioned Alabama. You're a Bama fan. Kalen DeBoer goes down there. Now, it takes a special person to not blink at the opportunity to replace the GOAT. And a coach now that the playoff has changed, we're probably never going to see a Nick Saban again. 12-team playoff means that the Nick Saban, kind of a thing, that's over. That's done, because it's just the math won't work out the same way. Your thoughts on him? Jalen Milroe, second full year as a starter, and looked like he hit a stride down the stretch. They will not have the kind of crazy depth they had, but it's not like they're starting from scratch.
Why? Well, just stab me. All right. If that's what you wanted to do, just when you said the depth part, it hit my soul when you said that. I talked to Jalen Milroe last year. Outstanding young man. Great head on his shoulders. It'll be interesting to see what Kalen DeBoer does with him. Kalen DeBoer, now it's not with Michael Penix Jr., but in the past he's had quarterbacks that have some of the qualities as far as versatility that Jalen Milroe has on the offensive side of the ball. You mentioned it. A part of me, and it's funny, my producer at NBC Sports is a close friend of mine, Tony Gill, and he's an Alabama fan. And I've been telling Tony for years that because he would get mad at everything, and like if Alabama didn't win this year, and like years when we would steal it, like a few years ago, and I'm like, we just stole a championship. This is so great, right? And but I would tell him enjoy this because the empire is coming to an end. You can see it, and you mentioned it as far as just with the 12-team playoffs, but also we also talked about NIL, transfer portal. Like that's another reason Nick Saban was ready to go outside of it. It was just time for him to step away. And so that's going to cost Alabama a lot. But I think Kalen DeBoer is one of the best coaches in the country. And the fact that he decided to be the man after the man, because we grew up here and you don't want to be the man after the man. You want to be the man after the man after the man because you're standing in such a large shadow. But you're talking about one of the most competent minds offensively in college football in Kalen DeBoer. So I'm hoping. I'm still right now. I'm kind of taking a wait and see from the point of my heart is really involved in that, right? And it's like, why not enjoy still my memories while they're fresh of what Nick Saban did, than to jump in deep, and it may be a little rocky for a little while. And I still want to kind of enjoy what Saban did, as you said, being the GOAT and just taking it. You know what? It goes back to the Nebraska thing, right? Like I'm an Alabama fan because my side of the family that raised me, my father, my grandmother, my granddad, they're all from Alabama. And so my dad is the reason that I'm into sports or whatever. And he used to tell me, stories about Bear Bryant growing up and stuff like that. So, but during my life, outside of maybe a year when Bill Curry was there and I wasn't even into sports, Alabama really hadn't been Alabama. And I'm honestly, I never expected Alabama to be anywhere near where Bear Bryant had Alabama, right?
Yeah.
So what Nick Saban did, I didn't expect to happen, and he did it way grander than I could have expected. So I just appreciate those years of talking trash to people. And like you said, like I think they didn't have championships like this, but like one of the last Blue Bloods, and I'm sorry, I didn't get to the Nebraska part. It's the Nebraska part is Nebraska's one of those blue blood giants that's been dead that you never expected to come back, and maybe Matt Rhule would do that. But I'll end on this. The closest thing we had seen was what Pete Carroll did by rejuvenate USC. And that wasn't on the same level of what Nick Saban did at Alabama. And we saw the years over like 3 different spans where, the University of Miami has been able to come back. But that still wasn't under one coach with what Nick Saban did at Alabama. I hope Kalen DeBoer can keep it close to what it was. I don't expect it to be, as you mentioned, one with the playoffs, but just in general, what Nick Saban did at Alabama is an outlier. Like that's the thing. Like it's an outlier. It's not common, even before there was a playoff. It's not common that someone could do that. Not really in our lifetime. Maybe when we were closer to kids, but not a run like that where you were getting that many times. You were happy if your team over a 7-year period had 2 national titles and it was in the running for another 2. That was a great run. So it's been a great time, and I'm not going to answer your question because I don't want to think about
it. You know what? That's an ender right there. I love it. Kenneth, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship here. Really enjoyed having you on. We'll talk to you again next week. Really appreciate you getting back to me. This was fun. Kenneth Davis, everybody. Kenneth, tell everybody where they can find you in Big Ten Country, Bears, all of that.
All right. So, of course, on YouTube, NBC Sports Chicago, you can watch Under Center podcast. That's our Bears-centric podcast. And Big Ten Country is our Big Ten podcast. I'm on that with James Naveau. On the Under Center podcast, I'm on there with our Bears beat reporter Alex Shapiro and our Bears insider Josh Schrock. All great guys. You can follow me at That's Davis. Paul, I appreciate it. Great times. I look forward to talking to you next week.
Kenneth Davis with us. We're going to talk Big Ten every Friday.